Hi, Nancy Beauvert here with Agapi Marketing and Consulting. Welcome to our second in our series of the expert interviews. And today I'm pleased to have with me Paul McCrae. Paul is the principal of PH Media. Is that correct, Paul?
PH Media Works. Yep.
PH Media Works, and he has a long history. I guess when I met with Paul and we talked a little bit about his background, it's like marketing and PR is in his blood.
Somewhat DNA level, yeah.
Yeah, DNA, exactly. So maybe you can share with our audience here, Paul, a little bit about how you came to be such an expert in marketing and some of your background and
Sure.
some of your experience.
Yeah, so for the last 12 years, I've been in senior management roles in marketing within retail and everything from fashion, grocery, general merchandise, financial services, shipping, a few other things in between. So I've had, some broad experience in retail, in marketing, omni-channel, and in communications. Prior to my 12 years in retail, I was on the agency side and had a marketing agency that certainly had an expertise in video production, but was doing broad, strategy for marketing and a lot of video work, a lot of event work. And then prior to that, I worked in radio and television. So I've kind of covered the gamut. I've worked on the client side, I've worked on the agency side, and I've worked in media. During my retail experience, I did have an opportunity to, because of my communications background, was doing some communications work and was also pretty involved with corporate social responsibility. And in one of my last roles was sort of the point guy on putting a charitable foundation together for a corporation. So yeah, I've had broad experience.
Well, it sounds like very, very well rounded. And one of the things that I find interesting as well is you had mentioned your retail level experience. I've had very little experience from a marketing perspective at the retail level. I've focused primarily on B2B, and there are certainly some similarities, but some challenges and some differences when you're doing the B2C as well. It's a bit of a different game, although the fundamentals of marketing always kind of remain the same. How you approach the audience and things like that. I'm sure that there's a bit of a difference there.
Yeah, I suppose there is. I guess it's more of as you said, there are many similarities. You certainly have maybe more of a defined audience that you're targeting. But other than that, many of the same means of communication and messaging would be, pretty similar. Yeah.
Right. Now, if I'm remembering correctly from our initial meeting as well, Paul, you have some experience, didn't you? At one point, weren't you involved with some kind of a marketing training college program?
I was, yeah. We're going back a bit in time, but I mentioned my being on the agency side, and in what I have to think about this a bit. The years in 1991, as a young guy who had been recently married, had two babies at home, was involved in actually something completely different. It was marketing and sales, but for hotel chains. I was with Westin at one point and Crown Plaza early in my career, and I had two babies at home, and there was a family business that had been national for a lot of years. My father owned a broadcast college that founded its roots with actually he was at the Academy of Radio Arts. That goes back into the 40s, working with Lauren Green, and from that in the 50s, 60s, radio, there weren't a lot of opportunities for training for broadcast for radio. And so my dad was an early pioneer in that. And the company was, he became ill, and I had been involved, became re-involved. And after my dad passed away, and I was still doing this moonlight, keeping things going, I made a decision to buy the company, and I did. And ultimately, we had what was far more broad. I was noticing at that point, and we're talking about the early '90s, that computers were playing a much bigger role in broadcast, that production was being
Right.
done, non-linear was coming into its own. And, at that point, this is prior to the bubble popping, but the internet was, in its infancy too.
Emerging.
And so I really recognized that there was an opportunity for some of the training, traditional communications training, desktop publishing, photo manipulation, editing, all of that stuff was really coming together. And I realized that there was probably an opportunity for all of those traditional skills to be used within corporate, government, other industry segments. And, I'm patting myself on the back here because I think that was fairly visionary
That's
then,
allowed, yeah.
to think that what was, where we're at today, that there was a bit of vision to that. So the college, which founded its roots in traditional broadcast, moved into, you know, digital multimedia training with an eye towards a much bigger job market than radio and television. And we were a little bit ahead of our time. It was tough.
I remember those days. Yeah, I remember those days, Paul, and there was kind of a split decision there on if the internet was going to be a passing phase and if people were really going to catch on. And look where we
Well, yeah,
are.
just sort of the practicality of, people were saying all the buzz was there, the vision was there that commerce and, all these great, you'd have online malls and but it was
Yeah.
really, as everybody, well, everybody old enough would remember,
Yeah.
it was that was pretty early days, and certainly there were a lot of people jumping on. And I was watching something on TV the other day about exactly this. I think it was those shows where they're talking about the different decades, and this was the '80s and '80s,
Right.
'90s when the bubble. There were companies that were becoming public that had no business plan or any
Yeah.
revenue, and there were
Yeah.
billions of
Yeah.
dollars being raised for these startups. And of course, we all know how that went. I didn't
Yeah.
invest. I was okay. Hopefully you were too.
Good for you. Good for you. Yeah.
But yeah, crazy
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess that's a nice segue here because the fact that you talk about, we were talking about marketing being in your DNA and your dad being ahead of his time, and then you taking that leap into the digital age. That kind of is a nice segue here into what you're doing now with the digital
Right.
signage. So maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about, exactly what digital signage is, what they can
Sure.
expect, how long it's been going, some of the advances. Maybe you
Sure.
can share some
So
of.
I've had a bit of a journey with digital signage. As I mentioned, that video production is something that's very much has been in my wheelhouse. And so maybe I can describe sort of the journey that I've been on in that arena and where I'm at today. So I
That'd
was
be great.
working in fashion with Nygaard International in this is now 2004. I was the first employee through the door on something called NFN, which was Nygaard Fashion Network. And the vision of that business unit was to do a couple of things. One, it was an in-house production division that was part of the overall marketing group that would produce video content, motion graphics, etc. For a couple of things. One, for the online, for the e-com website, for the corporate website, for communications and PR. Would produce fairly large scale events, typically fashion shows, support personal appearance tours through the US primarily U.S., and undertake a digital sign network for retail, and while retail and corporate. So the content being, slightly different in terms of the messaging, and so the vision, that was the vision. And I was the first guy through the door. There wasn't technology identified, the platform for it, the format for the content, the facilities. So I went about putting a team and a facility together. And then in 2004, 2005, there were so many companies, from screen manufacturers, computer manufacturers, appliance manufacturers, software solutions. Everybody then had a buzz for that, having the solution for digital signage. In North America, it wasn't very prevalent. In Europe, it has been for certainly longer. But at that point, there weren't a lot of digital sign networks in North America. Some, but in its infancy, and to a point it still is. So we went about, there was a huge consolidation in the market. We ended up, the IT department there was very robust, and the CIO and I worked together to identify and test everybody's solutions, and we ended up arriving at our own. We co-developed content management software and put together our own network. And ultimately, we had something like 23 channels of content in Nygaard retail outlets, and eventually moved to one of his major clients in the U.S., department store with about 320 doors with video screens that we were creating and pushing content to. And, the content certainly supported brand, but it also, we were using multiple screens in one given location, smaller screens that were co-located, fixed within fixturing within the retail footprint, and then larger screens that were showing fashion show footage and doing more of the brand work. And we did some really neat things there. We put together, using RFID technology, tables that had aerials built into them with screens on them, and you had product placed on the screen. When you lifted a particular product, the RFID would do an inventory and say, something's missing, and it'd trigger content on the screen that would, if a woman picked up a blouse, it might say, we noticed you picked this up. And if you, look to your left, there's a great section of pants that would complement it. So we were doing a lot of neat stuff, and it was fun to have such a robust IT group that was supporting marketing, and, we kind of dreamt it up and
Pioneers
and
themselves.
try and put it together in house. So there was some neat stuff there. Where that has gone now, certainly I mentioned that in Europe, digital sign networks have been around for quite a while. There's much more market penetration in Europe than there is in North America. I actually just got back from the Digital Sign Expo in Las Vegas. Have attended that 2 weeks ago. Have attended that show a few times, not in recent years, and to an extent, there's certainly the same sort of scenario where everybody from screen manufacturers, everybody is in this arena with specific appliances and software to accommodate digital signage. It's going through huge growth in the U.S. and Canada. In Canada, the market penetration is really in its infancy, but I'm sure people out there would have noticed there are some certainly Tim Hortons and A&W have adopted it for digital menu boards, and the one thing that was kind of funny that I have noticed before and have really picked up on is a huge opportunity is the strategy behind content and behind how
Hmm.
the technology is being used in omni-channel, to supplement, support social media, web, mobile. And so in the brick and mortar environment, what are you doing with the digital signage? And a lot of
Right.
companies have thrown screens in, have the technology down, are repurposing TV spots, are, putting up a given sale or something like that. But the strategy behind the traffic patterns, the loop time, the brand versus promotion, the real strategy that goes behind that, and how this channel, beacons, social media, mobile, how all of those things all interact to support and strengthen the customer journey. And what was resounding with attendees that I spoke with, exhibitors that I talked to, was that there are content creators, there were exhibitors there that are content creators, but nobody is really putting the strategic hat on and, in
Right.
terms of placement, the placement of the screens, the content, all of that. And we are. That's
Well, it's kind of funny, Paul, because it seems like the buzzword recently is all about customer experience. Everybody's talking about the customer experience. And let's face it, it's all about the customer, whether you're B2B or B2C. If you're business to business, the other business that you're marketing to is your customer. So no matter how you slice it, you always should be taking care of your
right.
customer and not promoting what you necessarily want to promote, but what is in the long-term interest that the customer wants. If you don't speak to your customer, you're going to lose your market share. And that's part of that whole strategy that you're talking about,
Right,
I'm sure.
and one other big thing that social media is really changing the marketing landscape is it's one thing to have a brand to get your customers, your clients to buy into that brand vision, to buy into the brand, but now it's equally important to listen rather than just to tell, because your
Yeah,
customers may have a very defined idea of who you are, and it may not be exactly who you think you are. So through social media,
right.
you better be listening and you better be plugged into the conversation because it's going to happen with you or without you. So
That's right. Very good point. Yeah.
yeah, it is really certainly the penetration of social media, for quite a while now, has been changing the marketing game so that it's far more engaged, it's real
Mm.
time, and as I said, you need to be part of the conversation, and you need to be listening because your customers are going to tell you who you are.
Well, and that's a big important point I think about social media too. I know that over the years I've been trying to keep my finger on the pulse as well of social media, obviously for my clients. And one of the things that keeps coming back over and over again is how difficult it is, except for the big major brands, to measure the ROI on social media. And my stand has always been, why are you using social media? What channels are you using? And what are you looking for to get out of it? And I think that sometimes we can't lose sight of the fact that it's not all about getting those immediate dollars back on the ROI. It's a matter, like you say, of being out there and being seen and listening and being engaging with your audience on a more minute to minute basis almost in
Right.
some
Well,
cases.
marketing is to your point. Marketing is has a lot to do with just storytelling. Affinity with your
Exactly.
customers, just storytelling about who your brand is, and getting that buy-in. And it's way more participation based now. So did that ROI? There's hard and soft measures for ROI. That
Exactly.
soft one, which is brand buy, boy, if you can do that, like some great brands out there from Current, AB&B, and some of the other Lululemon, and some of the other great brands out there that they don't have to go on sale to get you to come into their store. And some brands that have
That's
a
right.
tendency to let those, we need the customers, and we're on a fiscal calendar. It's Q1. We got to get these guys in. Sale, sale, sale. Suddenly, your customers
Yeah,
aren't coming in unless you are on sale. So,
right.
yeah,
All boils down to that strategy that you have to have in place for your marketing, whether you're large or whether
right,
you're small. Can I just step back here a little bit too, Paul? Now, you were talking about the digital signage, and of course, we know that Europe tends to adopt things way, way advance of North America, and I hate to actually admit it, but usually Canada is behind the States as well. My experience is that a lot of people think of digital signage as those little numeric little things that scroll across there and things
right.
like that, and I suspect that that plays a part of it, but I think it was an important example that you gave about the menu boards at places like Tim
Right.
Hortons, so that people can have a bit more of a visual. So that's obviously where the trends are going with the digital signage, something more interactive like that, more
Yeah,
visual.
well, more visual,
Is that what you're finding?
certainly. Certainly, a lot of this in the retail environment, a lot of the screens are replacing what would have been print in the past. And there's some neat
Mm-hmm.
things about digital signage that print can't do. Obviously, one is the real-time aspect of being able to put content up, very rapidly, rather than having a production queue, print queue, distribution queue. So that's certainly one key advantage to, being able to distribute electronic digital content. The other is more engagement, obviously. And then, there are integrated solutions too, where you can actually have your digital signage integrated into your inventory, so that, based on inventory level, you could have specials being presented. So again, there's some behind the scenes things that can play into a digital sign network that can give you, it's really a sales assistant, digital sales assistant,
Sounds
but
like
can also be triggered by a whole bunch of things going on behind the scenes, like inventory. So
that's
yeah,
great. Yeah,
this
really ends up being time saving and advantageous, I would think, for the business at the
Well,
end of the
for
day.
staffing, sure. Typically, the best scenario for these is that the staff never touch them, that they don't have to turn a screen
Right.
on, that they don't have to. There's no loading of content; it's centrally pushed. So the staff, it's going, 24 hours a day if necessary, but whatever the hours of operation, that it's going without any intervention from the in-store staff. They can focus on the customer, and they don't need to be AV technicians or anything. It's all taken care of centrally.
All, and you host it in the cloud, and changes are made on the central server, and so it's kind of a
Yeah,
one-stop shop
yeah.
effect. Right. Right. Now, for some of the smaller businesses, is this financially within the reach of the small and medium-sized businesses, do you think, or is that
Well,
down the
there's
road
certain,
yet before
there's
it becomes a thing?
definitely solutions for, individual offices or stores. I've certainly seen independent stores or franchisees that have, maybe not had, the franchisor has not adopted this yet, but the franchisee is entrepreneurial and has done, put a screen up on the wall and put some content together, which is admirable. So certainly the scalability of the content and the strategy, there are solutions for content certainly where you can be cost effective in building templates and images, an image library, and creating, templates where messaging can be placed. Obviously, the more engaging and the more you can bring a brand to life or a story to life on these screens through content, the content creation gets more expensive, and then the number of screens or number of stores that content is distributed to, obviously by a per store cost basis, which is frequently the models that are put together for ROI measurement. can prove that the content is less expensive by, by the distribution. So the broader the distribution, the more cost effective the content is. But so it's a mixed bag. To your point, there's certainly things that you can do with a smaller footprint of a store or a couple of stores to create content that certainly is more informative than if you didn't have it.
So it doesn't
Right.
have to be out of reach.
Yeah.
Right. So now let's talk a little bit about PH Media Works and how you help people. So if somebody was interested in digital signage, tell me what PH Media Works is going to do for them.
Well, what we do, and I emphasize that there's a real opportunity with a strategic approach to this undertaking, and it complements the other marketing efforts that a brand is engaged in. So, and dependent on the product, dependent on the organization, dependent on the store environment. What we do work to prove out, really, there's an engagement where we're partners in building the strategy, in building the business model for a network, and identifying KPIs, identifying a measurable return on the investment of doing it. So, and then supporting. Again, it's dependent on the organization. We can be a full turnkey partner where we're, involved in partnership to build the business model for a digital sign network, to manage the construction of it, and to maintain and provide content for it. We can do that whole thing. And then depending on the organization, there are, situations where perhaps they would undertake pieces of it themselves. So it's really a project by project to look at, what's required. We're not going to, the pom-poms and just say, hey, we are partners, and we do work through the plan
Right.
of what that network should look like and how we're going to, ensure that it's paying off. So,
Right. So as little or as much as anybody needs to help put into place and run an effective digital
yeah,
signage
that's right.
campaign.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I thank you very much for your time, Paul. It's been very enlightening, and I'm sure very educational as well for our audience out here. And can you just please tell us how people can get in touch with you
Sure.
if they want your website and your
Well,
contact
since we've been
information?
talking about social media and the web so much, I guess the website's probably the best way to do it. www.phmediaworks.com. And all the other
Excellent.
contact info is there. So yeah, anybody's looking to undertake something like this, we'd be delighted to talk to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Paul, and for sharing your expertise. And we look forward to interacting with
Great,
you again in
Nancy.
the
Thanks.
future.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye for now.